It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. Your premier source for sports news and analysis in Oregon and Washington. Live on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
What is up? Welcome to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show, brought to you by the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. I am your host, Andy Patton. You can find me on Twitter at Andy Patton PNW, and you can find the Worldwide Sports Radio Network on Twitter as well at WWSRN_radio. All right, today is episode 4 of the show. Many of you probably know this, but we are in the middle of a Seattle Seahawks Monday night football game against the Philadelphia Eagles. It has been what we'll call a defensive battle. Primarily, it has been pretty horrendous offense from both sides, particularly the Eagles. They did go on a final drive to end the half to put them on the board and then missed the extra point because it is the Eagles, and that is what happens to them. As I am talking right now, they are kicking off the second half. If you see me glancing this way, that is because I am also watching the game, hoping to give you some live reactions to things that are happening. We will talk about the Seahawks, the playoff implications, where they're at, what things, kind of how things are shaking out for the last couple of weeks of the season. At the end of the show, after we know how this game is going, I would have liked to be able to open with them, assuming they had like a 28-0 lead against a pretty hapless Eagles squad. But it's the Seahawks, and you know how they do, and they're going to keep this game close until the last possible second. So I don't blame any of you for having that game up while you're listening as well. But hopefully Seattle will pull off a victory, and we can discuss what that looks like. However, before we get there, we have another really fun episode coming your way. Andrew Hammond from the Tacoma News Tribune is going to join me about a half an hour. Him and I are going to discuss the Seattle Sounders and their quest for another MLS Cup, which will continue on Tuesday evening against FC Dallas in the Western Conference semifinals. That's right, y'all. We're moving into soccer. We've briefly talked on the Seattle Mariners. We've talked college football. We've talked college basketball. We've talked NBA draft. We've talked Seattle Seahawks. Now we're talking Sounders. Your boy is branching out. We're going to talk hockey. We're going to talk XFL. We got all sorts of fun stuff coming your way on the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show, and I'm excited to bring soccer, specifically Sounders soccer, into the mix. And having Andrew on to discuss it is just the perfect recipe for success here. He's an expert, and it's going to be excellent. Him and I are also going to talk Pac-12 football. We're going to talk about Oregon State's win over the Ducks in the Civil War. We're going to talk about UW being undefeated and their chances of now potentially winning the Pac-12 North. All sorts of fun stuff going on there. But even before we get there, I'm telling you everything in reverse order. We are going to open up the show with college basketball. It's back. College basketball is here. The season has started. Many of the Pac-12 schools and other local programs have begun their seasons already. And I promise, I can't promise this. I would like to promise you that I'm not just going to spend the next 25 minutes only talking about the Zags, but your boy is biased. I will admit that. And also the Zags are really good. So we're talking Zaga basketball. We're going to talk about their wins. We're going to talk Huskies, their game against Baylor. We'll talk a little bit Beavers and Cougars and some Pac-12 preview as well. But let's start with the Gonzaga Bulldogs. 2-0 with big-time wins over the Kansas Jayhawks and the Auburn Tigers to kick off the season. Look, here's the deal. We're just going to come out 4 minutes into the show. The Zags are the best college basketball team in the country. It's hardly debatable. Baylor is the only debate that exists. Virginia lost. They lost to a potentially up-and-coming University of San Francisco squad. Plays in the West Coast Conference. Represent. Same conference as Gonzaga, obviously. So they lost. Villanova lost. Kentucky lost. Duke looked very beatable against Coppin State. There's a lot of already teams falling at the top. There's already been a handful of, Kansas is 6th and they lost. Obviously, they lost to the Zags, but still they lost. Pretty much every team at the top has lost. Now, Baylor did not. Baylor led an absolute beatdown on a University of Washington team that I don't think is very good. I'm not going to diminish Baylor's accomplishments. They're 2-0. They've won both their games by huge margins. They're shooting like 50% from three. But the great news for college basketball fans who are maybe unsettled who haven't decided whether they think Gonzaga or Baylor is better. They're playing each other in a week, so we'll have an answer. We will know on Saturday. Those two teams will face off, assuming there are no COVID-19 issues, which there could be. We will talk about that. The only blemish in Gonzaga's otherwise outstanding first week was a positive for their game against would still that happens. The NFL just at halftime of this game, for those of you who are watching, were bragging about how they have not had any games canceled, which is an odd thing to brag about because they've had so many games postponed. They played a game yesterday where there was no quarterback for the Denver Broncos. So it's like saying, well, we haven't had any games postponed is very disingenuous. I know that I'm getting off topic, but it is something that I don't think is really brag-worthy for the NFL, considering what they've had to do to get games played. College basketball will have games canceled, and they will also play games that maybe they shouldn't. I don't know everything about this Gonzaga squad. I promise if they deserve to be criticized for this, that I will. I'm not trying to hold biases or anything. We've heard that there were some positive tests for St. Joe's, the team that Kansas played. If those get traced back to Gonzaga, this is going to look very bad for this program. Hopefully that's not the case. Everybody can stay safe, stay healthy, and continue to play college basketball. But getting back to the topic at hand, the Zags absolutely walloped Kansas. Yes, the final score showed that they won by 12. And yes, Kansas had some they had some runs early in the second half, which seems to be a time that Mark Few and the Zags always struggle, is early in the second half. I think opposing teams make adjustments maybe better than Mark Few does. If I had a criticism of him, it would be that, and also the inability to come up with out of bounds plays, which is something that Gonzaga has never done well ever. But Gonzaga ended up kind of taking that punch from Kansas and giving it right back and dropped 102 points. First time Kansas has given up 100 or more points in regulation since 1990. That's the year that I was born. That is 10 years before everybody on these basketball teams was born. That was a long, long time ago. Yes, this Kansas squad was raw. They were raw. Bill Self does not have quite as much experience and depth, I think, as they've had in years past. But this team was also very, very good. And I think deserved that number 6 ranking and will finish the season ranked in the top 10. They're really good football. They're a really good basketball program. And I think that Gonzaga is just better. I mean, I think when you watch that game, if anybody did, Gonzaga is a better basketball team than Kansas. And it's one of those things that I think more casual fans will be like, well, yeah, the Gonzaga is really good, but it's still wild for people in Spokane, people who've been fans of this program for a long time, to just accept like, yeah, Gonzaga is the number 1 team in the country to start the year, beat the number 6 team in the country to start the year in Kansas. And that's just like a normal thing. It's pretty crazy. It's a pretty wild thing that has happened to this little school in Spokane, Washington. You know, to take that step. There's so many other programs like it, programs of similar size, similar religious affiliation, located in similar markets, who have never, ever been able to take this leap and do it consistently. And for the Zags to do what they've done and have the recruiting class that they have is remarkable. It truly is. And it needs to be celebrated. I know many people don't like to celebrate it. I understand that. You're probably not making enough noise if there aren't people out there who hate you. So I'm sure that's how Gonzaga fans feel at this point, is they're getting attention, and that's good. Jalen Suggs, the real deal. I think that, he came in number 6 recruit in the country, according to ESPN, highest rated recruit in Gonzaga's illustrious history, committed on live TV on ESPN, like ripped his sweatshirt off to show the Gonzaga shirt underneath, made this whole big deal about it, something that hasn't happened for Gonzaga recruits ever. In fact, Suggs is only the second McDonald's All-American to commit to Gonzaga out of high school. The Zags did have 2 other McDonald's All-Americans in Micah Downs and Kyle Wiltshire, but they went to other schools and then transferred to Gonzaga. So Suggs is second behind Zach Collins in that regard. I really think that he could challenge for the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft. I have a hard time imagining him being outside of the top 10, barring some kind of very epic collapse or, of course, an injury. Cade Cunningham from Oklahoma is the presumed number one, and he's extremely good. He's bigger than Suggs. He's just as skilled, or arguably more skilled in a lot of ways, but Suggs is right there. Evan Mobley from USC, extremely talented big man, who can handle the ball, who can shoot a little bit from the outside at 7 feet tall with long arms. He's going to be in the mix as well. USC just had a guy drafted 6th this year, Onyeka Okongwu, so Mobley could probably top that, or at least be right in that same range. But Suggs is right there. He does a little bit of everything. He can play 1, he can play 2. He's kind of a combo guard. I mean, we've seen comps that are way, way, way too aggressive and too intense, but we've seen Brandon Roy, we've seen Damian Lillard, we've seen other guards that aren't former Blazers. Kyrie Irving has been mentioned. I don't know if I'm going to quite christen him that yet after 2 good college basketball games. He certainly has some things he needs to work on still. He commits a lot of fouls. That's something that happens to a lot of freshmen in general, but is particularly prevalent for Suggs. He goes like a freight train towards the basket. I mean, my goodness, the guy he has a football background, which is something every single Gonzaga game any of you watch this season, you will hear the announcer mention that Jalen Suggs was a quarterback in high school. I guarantee it. Absolutely guarantee it. If you ever watch a Gonzaga game and you don't hear the announcers say that, you can tell me about it and I'll eat crow, but I promise you it's going to get mentioned every single time. And he plays like it. You can see the way he drives to the basket with incredible reckless abandon. He's still able to finish through immense amounts of contact, which is an extremely valuable skill, not only in college basketball, but in the NBA as well. It also has presented itself in situations where he just runs people over and gets called for offensive fouls, or just doesn't get the foul call that he wanted and just misses the shot or turns the ball over, things like that. So he needs to clean that stuff up a little bit. Again, I feel silly criticizing a very good point guard after 2 games of his collegiate career. It's really just to illustrate that he's not quite perfect, but he's pretty darn close. And I think he's going to be very, very good. Meanwhile, the Eagles, for those of you watching, are marching down the field right now, about at the 10-yard line. If they score here, they could potentially tie it up or bring it to within 1. Classic example of the Seahawks not putting teams away when they should be putting them away. Moving on from Jalen Suggs, Drew Timme also looks like a potential All-American candidate, first-round potential if he can show that outside shot. That's the one thing we haven't seen from him yet. Mark Few loved to talk up how good Drew Timme's 3-point shooting was during practices, during the offseason, that he's developed that shot. I'll believe it when I see it. I think he's capable of it. I think he looks smooth when he shoots the ball. His free throw shooting looks better. But if he can step it out and shoot from the outside, this team is completely unguardable. And he becomes a pretty easy NBA draft prospect. Right now, that's the one thing that's holding him back. And then you have Corey Kispert, near lock to be an All-American, I think. I mean, he's 6'7" guy, can do a little bit of everything. He shot 44% from 3 last year. I think it's realistic to think he could shoot like 50% this year. He's going to be open because the Zags are so overwhelming on offense that it's really, really hard to guard everybody. Suggs has proven to be a good distributor already in his young career. I don't think that that's going to go away. He's a good at driving to the basket and dishing out from there, which will leave Kispert open for a lot of threes. I think he's going to knock down about half his threes this year. He's also a guy who can finish around the rim. His passing has improved. His defense has improved. He's a good on-ball defender, something that he kind of struggled with a little bit earlier in his career. I think he's improving as a help defender as well. He's just a very cerebral basketball player, highly intelligent, had been the team leader for a couple of years already on this team. You may remember in episode 3, my conversation with Brenna Green of Creme 2 News in Spokane. She came on. We talked a little bit about the Zags, and we talked about Corey Kispert, and we talked about his leadership and how he's kind of had that leadership role well before this year, which is an important thing for the Zags. Corey's really the only senior on this roster. I said, really, he is. He's the only senior on this roster, and they really need him to step into that leadership role. And the fact that he was pretty much already doing it last year, even on a roster that had a Killian Tilly, who was a senior, had a Ryan Woolridge and Admon Gilder, who were seniors, admittedly graduate transfers, so maybe didn't feel like they could come in and immediately kind of take over that role right away. But Kispert did. He leaned into that leadership role, and now it's his team. It's unquestionably his team. There's very few other returners. Timme and Ayayi are returners, but they've really only been playing on this basketball team for 1 year. each. The other returners have less experience than that. They have a grad transfer in Aaron Cook and another transfer in Andrew Nemhard, but those guys haven't been around the program long enough to really step into that leadership role. So Corey's going to be that kind of bleeding heart, that soul of the team, the guy that they always post the pictures of when they talk about how good this team is, and I think that he's made himself look like a very legitimate NBA prospect as well. Kind of a more physical, but maybe not quite as adept 3-point shooting Kyle Korver-esque guy. He's built similarly. I think he's got a little bit more in his toolbox than just outside shooting, but it's hard to say he's going to be as good of an outside shooter as a Kyle Korver, who was one of the greatest outside shooters in the history of the NBA. But I could see a kind of a role like that for him where he's kind of asked to shoot it a little bit, maybe play some defense and just kind of be a body that they can use at the wing. It's really hard to find good quality wings in the NBA. The Portland Trailblazers had to work really hard to get the wings that they have in Derek Jones Jr. and Robert Covington and Rodney Hood and Carmelo Anthony. And it's difficult. It's a difficult position to find guys. And if you can get a guy who can big enough to play that position, who can shoot well from the outside, who can play a little defense, who won't hurt you on that side of the ball, as the Eagles kick a field goal to make it 14-9 with Seattle getting the ball back. Hopefully they can do something here and put a little distance between themselves and the Eagles. But yeah, I think the Zags have 3 legitimate NBA prospects for this season. Joel Ayayi is a guy who declared for the NBA draft last year and decided he wanted to come back. So he's still around. Anton Watson is, I firmly believe, an NBA prospect as well. Maybe one of the best NBA prospects on this team. I think that might surprise some people to hear me say that, but I think his length, his athleticism, really, really resonates with NBA scouts. I think they're really going to like the way that he looks. He's got incredible defensive instincts, things that are really hard to teach. He looks like a natural on that end of the floor. Offensively, he's really raw. His outside shot hasn't showed up at all. He shot 11% from 3 last year in a admittedly very small sample size, but he hasn't shot at all this year, really. So you'll need to see that, but I think NBA scouts are far more likely to take a chance on a kid with that level of athleticism who maybe hasn't quite found the outside shot, because it's a lot easier to teach a guy how to shoot threes than it is to teach them how to develop defensive instincts or how to be long on defense. You can't really teach a guy that. So Watson has those kind of things that are hard to teach. Unteachable, that's the word I was looking for. He's got those unteachable things, and I think can improve upon the things that he hasn't quite showed yet. So there's 5 quality NBA players in my mind, at least, right there. There's probably more on the bench. The 2 other members of the tricky trio, Dominic Harris and Julian Strother, who did not play against Auburn, like I said, because of a COVID-19 positive test. Those 2 guys are not going to be huge role players this year. I don't think Gonzaga really noticed not having them on the court against Auburn, which, again, these guys were top 60 recruits in their class, some of the highest rated recruits Gonzaga has ever gotten, and they're just not part of the rotation this year. That's how ridiculously deep this team is. And then you have Andrew Nemhard. I mentioned him earlier, but we found out he was eligible shortly after me and Brenner recorded an episode 3. So when we talked about the rotation, we talked about the potential role Dominic Harris could have. That was a big part of our conversation. For those of you who remember, all of that was scrapped pretty much immediately because Andrew Nemhard is now eligible. He was expected to sit out this year after transferring from Florida. He initially declared for the NBA draft, decided he wanted to come back, and then decided to transfer. Came to Gonzaga, thought he was going to have to sit out a year. NCAA granted his waiver, so he is now a part of the rotation and adds such an incredible element of strong passing, strong scoring, good defense. I think just can do it all as a guy that was expected to start and play a huge role next year and now gets to do that a year early as a likely backup, although I think you'll see the Zags start a lot of 3-guard lineups with Ayayi and Suggs and Nemhard all playing at the same time, with Corey Kispert playing the 4. Kind of small ball lineups, but you can really get away with that in the WCC. All right. I will move on. I have plenty more I could say about the Zags. If you want to hear more about Gonzaga, I do have my own Gonzaga podcast that is specifically about the Zags. It is called Score Zags Score. You can find it wherever you get podcasts: Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify. It is hosted at Belly Up Sports, which is a partner of the Worldwide Sports Radio Network as well. All right, so the University of Washington Huskies also played a basketball game. Their game did not go as well. They opened up against Baylor, which kudos to them for playing Baylor. They played Baylor last year and beat them. come from behind win. Excellent game for UW. It was a big marker for them to beat such a talented Baylor squad, but both teams just went in wildly different directions after that game. I think Baylor won 23 in a row, finished ranked within the top 3, was ranked number 1 for a while during that season. Meanwhile, the Huskies lost most of the rest of their games, lost 11 in a row in the Pac-12. Things just absolutely fell apart for Coach Mike Hopkins in that squad. Jaden McDaniels and Isaiah Stewart seemed a bit checked out. At least McDaniels did. Stewart played fine. They both put up good numbers, but I think they were kind of ready for the NBA. Let's put it that way. Quade Green got that suspension and missed the rest of the year, and the team just legitimately fell apart. And now this year, and they played this pretty much the same Baylor squad. Baylor didn't lose a whole lot of guys, and this team didn't have McDaniel, Stewart, or Nas Carter, who scored, I think, like 54 of the team's 64 points against Baylor last year. So things did not go nearly as well. They got beat up real bad. And I kind of think this is what you're going to see a little bit from this University of Washington team this year. I'm really down on them. I wrote some preseason rankings for the Pac-12 at Busting Brackets, and I believe that I had UW 11th in the Pac-12. I think only Cal and Oregon State were behind them. If I was rewriting it now, I might pick them to be 11th. I might move Oregon State up a spot. I'm not sure. Either way, it's going to be potentially a pretty rough year for the Huskies on Montlake. They got Quade Green is back. He was, like I said, he got suspended for academic reasons last year. He's a Kentucky transfer, expected to be a big part of the team. He looked very bad against Baylor. Full disclosure, I had to read box scores and watch highlights. This game was only available on Flow Hoops, I think, which was a pay-for site. And it's unfortunate that they couldn't find a way to get a game with the number 2 team in the country and a high major program like UW. Couldn't find a way to get it somewhere to watch. But I'll get off my soapbox on that. Anyway, Quade Green had 2 points in 25 minutes. He only took a couple of shots, didn't put up much numbers at all, just kind of floated around the basketball court, didn't contribute. And that's a huge problem. He was probably the team's 3rd or 4th best player last year, and all of the guys who were ahead of him are gone. You need him to step up into a role. And he at least in game 1, he didn't do it. Who knows exactly what happened? I'd have to watch the full tape to know more. We'll see more as the season goes on for this Husky squad, but I'm pretty out on them right now. Eric Stevenson's a nice piece. He's a local kid who transferred from Wichita State, was one of like 9 kids who transferred out of Wichita State before they finally fired Coach Greg Marshall for tremendous allegations of abuse against his players. Good for Stevenson for getting out of that situation. Glad he came back home. He had a pretty nice game. He had 8 points for UW in his first game with them. I think he'll be a nice piece, kind of similar to Nembhard. He was expected to have to sit out a year, but then had his waiver granted at the last minute, so he will play. Raekwon Battle led the Huskies with 10 points. I think he's going to be decent as well. They got some pieces. They got some guys who are okay, but I'm not thrilled about this University of Washington team. All right, the Ducks next. They have yet to play. Their first game is not until December 12th against UW. They don't have a non-conference schedule. I'm pretty intrigued by this team, but obviously losing a Peyton Pritchard is just a massive, massive loss. He was such an integral piece of what they did on offense and defense. 20-point per game guy, was one of the best non-freshmen in the country last year. Got picked 26th overall by the Boston Celtics, much higher than I thought he would go. Good for him, though. And they also lost Anthony Mathis and Shakir Houston, big role guys on that roster last year. So they're, I think when doing a lot of research on the Pac-12 and kind of looking at the rosters coming into the season, you see a lot of teams that didn't seem to replenish as much of the talent that they lost. Obviously, it's hard to tell. There are certainly freshmen and transfers who will pop and who will do better than expected. But looking at this Ducks roster, and sure, they got Will Richardson and Chris Duarte back. Those guys are both very good. Duarte averaged 13 and 5.5 as a sophomore last year. Richardson was 11 and 4 as a freshman. They got Jalen Terry, who's number 73 recruit in the country. It's good. It's pretty good. He's expected to be the point guard of the future, but I don't know how much you're going to see him in year 1. It's hard for freshmen to play right away unless they're really, really top tier guys. Again, UW has bred point guards really well. There's little doubt that they will turn this guy into a very good player, but they need him or somebody else to really step up into that role. And as of right now, I'm not super confident they have that guy on the roster. In the backcourt, the front court, they have N'Faly Dante, who was rough last year. He only played 12 games because he had a lot of injury issues. He looked at the guy who's great at finishing alley-oops around the rim, but didn't do a whole lot else. The Ducks are going to need him to be more than that. Dana Altman needs this guy to be a legitimate force offensively, a guy who can score in the paint, who can hit little jump shots, can do all of that stuff. If he can do that, I think you're looking at a team that finishes top 3 in the Pac-12, gets themselves 4 or 5 seed potentially, and can maybe even do some damage in March. But unless he really shows up, or one of the other guys who we're not talking about really pops, this could be a kind of a middle of the road season for the Ducks, which, there's a lot of Pac-12 schools that I think could reasonably kind of finish right in that range. Then you got your Beavers and your Cougars. They are 4-0 combined. Oregon State has a win over Cal, and they played a Division III school. The Washington State Cougars beat Texas Southern and Eastern Washington to get to their 2 wins. Both these programs are kind of in similar positions where they lost extremely high-level talent from their roster last year. Oregon State lost Trace Tinkle. Not only was he the coach's kid, he's the leading scorer in Oregon State's basketball history. He passed Gary Payton in his final season. Outstanding player, big kind of a combo forward guy, do-it-all type player. Elite scorer. A big loss for them. He didn't get drafted, but he ended up signing a 2-way deal with the Los Angeles Lakers, and that is where he is right now. And then Washington State lost CJ Ellaby, who we spoke about on last week's episode, a guy who left after his sophomore year, had broken some of Klay Thompson's records at Washington State for single season scoring, and ended up getting drafted kind of surprisingly by the Portland Trailblazers in the second round, number 46 overall. Most people kind of expected that he would not get drafted, and instead he did. And instead Killian Tilly did not get drafted, which still kind of miffs me, but you know what? I will get over it. I promise. But Ellaby was a fantastic player for Washington State. They had to replace him. Noah Williams kind of stepped up for them. He had 19 points against Eastern Washington. But the Cougars barely won both these games. They beat Texas Southern by 3, and Eastern was winning for most of the game before Washington State kind of came back. So I'm not feeling great about them either. Texas Southern is a fairly solid program for being in the SWAC. They've played Gonzaga a handful of times. They're one of those programs that schedules these really ridiculously difficult non-conference schedules so they can get this experience playing all these high-level programs, and also so they can make some money because these programs pay them to come out and play against them. So that's kind of Texas Southern's deal. They've played some of these games really close in the past. They even won a few of these games, but any high major program probably shouldn't struggle too much with Texas Southern. And for Washington State to do that and then turn around and nearly lose to Eastern, who again is a fine program. They're not bad by any means, but Washington State being 2-0 is, I guess, not as impressive as it looks. I guess we can put it that way. I'm apprehensive about them. I had them in the bottom half of my Pac-12 rankings anyway. So I think that they probably don't finish higher than 7th or 8th at the absolute best, more likely 9th or 10th. And then Oregon State, they did pull off win off Cal, played a conference game real early in the year. But again, Cal is the team that I ranked dead last in the Pac-12, with Oregon State ranked 1 spot ahead of them. So in theory, I guess I expected them to win. Ethan Thompson had 15 against Cal. He's probably the best player on that squad. A rising senior, a guy who was productive last year, even with Trace Tinkle around, and now he's kind of the man. So I think you're going to see some pretty gaudy numbers from Thompson this year, in part because he's just the only guy that they really have who's capable of doing a lot of damage. If they have some other guys kind of show up who I'm not expecting, then great. Maybe they'll have themselves a decent year. I think Oregon State has been a little bit better than people have expected the last couple of years in basketball. They haven't quite taken that next step into being like a program to be trifled with, a program that can actually contend for NCAA tournament bids. But I think that they're close. I think that losing Tinkle probably takes them a step back, but maybe there's a chance that they can get back in there in the next year or two, potentially make some noise. Here's Jason Myers, just kicked himself a 44-yard field goal right through the uprights. So the Seahawks are now up 17-9. It has been a game that does not require me to give you a lot of updates because it has been a pretty slow moving game. But your Seahawks are now up 8 right now, and considering how poorly Philadelphia's offense has played and how well Seahawks defense has played, that might feel like enough of a lead for this team to hold on and get their 8th win of the season. All right, we will be right back. After this, we're going to bring on Andrew Hammond, and him and I are going to discuss the Seattle Sounders and their upcoming matchup against FC Dallas. Right after this.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. You're listening to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
All right, welcome back. I'm so excited for segment 2 today. Get to chat with Andrew Hammond of the Tacoma News Tribune. Andrew, what is going on? Thanks for coming on.
What's going on, man? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. I'm really excited that you're able to join. I am going to admit that I'm not a huge soccer guy. I've gone to a handful of Sounders games. You worked at the University of Portland and went to a lot of their games, which were a blast. But I'm really excited to have you on to kind of talk about this playoff picture, what's going on with the Sounders squad, and maybe talk a little bit about just the MLS in general and how we got to this point. I know just like every other sport, they were impacted pretty dramatically by COVID-19. Before that, though, I have to ask you, we're doing soccer, we're doing football, but we got to talk a little bit about Nate Robinson getting in the ring. Did you see that, or did you miss it?
Do we have to talk about that?
I was going to say, did you turn your TV on 5 seconds too late and miss the entire thing?
So I have a strict no pay-per-view policy on any type of combat sports, whether it be UFC, boxing, what have you. I'll watch WWE because it's whatever. But like, I won't buy the pay-per-views for UFC or boxing because one, they're a big waste of money.
Sure.
I just upset like 5 people out there. Sorry, guys. But no, I mean, it's one of those things where I can, check the fight on my phone. Somebody's either streaming it or somebody's got they're capturing video. And so when I'm watching the commentary on the fight, I see, oh God, Nate, not like this. Oh, he fell down again. And I'm just watching this scroll. And that term doom scrolling, that's been like very, very popular in 2020. I am looking at this and I'm just like, oh God, Nate Robinson. It wasn't Nate Robinson's going to lose this fight. It was Nate Robinson's going to get knocked out. And wouldn't you know, like this, I don't know if it was like the second or third. I think it's like might be the second round. He ends up getting taken out, and I'm just like, oh boy.
Yeah, it was tough.
It's not great.
Love Nate Robinson, love representing Seattle, love the dude as a he's a good football player, a great basketball player. It may have set back a lot of people who think they can step into the ring, literally in this case.
And so he's wearing his Rainier Beach colors, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah,
I thought was cool. But for some people, it got mixed up with Knicks colors.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was Rainier Beach, but I'm sorry. Those are Knicks colors when you do that.
Yeah.
You get taken out like that, those are Knicks colors. So I'm looking forward to the NBA season when the Knicks lose a game and I can use that meme. I'll just slap a Knicks logo on Nate's head. So, fun times.
Yeah, you're probably gonna have to post that quick because I don't think you're gonna be the only one with that idea.
Oh no! I'll probably steal it from somebody else because it's the internet where we steal everything.
That is right. All right, so transitioning to soccer. So I want to talk about this match coming up tomorrow, obviously, but first I kind of want to talk about the MLS as a whole. The NBA got a ton of attention for how they handled the COVID-19 situation with the bubble and the stopping the season, setting it up at a different time, picking the teams to go and seemingly having a ton of success with that. Other sports, baseball and football, have had much less success. I was talking earlier in the show about how the NFL is bragging about how none of their games have been canceled, which seems like a really strange thing to brag about when you have this Ravens-Steelers game just maybe going to be played. But the MLS, I feel like, at least in the circles that I follow in sports, and I think a handful of other people, didn't seem to get a ton of attention, but it seems like they had a fairly successful attempt at a bubble as well.
Yeah, and with the MLS, their biggest issue was getting the teams down there and get them safe. But as during that time, every team, it feels like in every single sport, was having a case or two.
Right.
what happens with a case or two, it becomes 3 or 4, 5 or 6. And so it all snowballed. But yeah, no, I thought that the way the MLS bubble, it began rough. And they did some mandatory quarantines, but for some teams, they had tested, because, great example, Dallas, they tested positive. Like a lot of players tested positive either the day before or 2 days before their match against Seattle, because they were supposed to open up against Seattle. And so they essentially had to quarantine for another week or two, which meant, you got to move them to another group, another stage, and all that. So once they got through that kind of that small rough patch, I thought that the tournament really carried over, and every team in a way had to face the challenges of humidity, games at 9 or there were games at 9 a.m. and it's already 80 something degrees out there. So I think it presented the challenge for everybody, but at the same time, everybody kind of persevered.
Yeah. It seemed to work really well, and I was impressed by their ability to make things work. Obviously, everybody went through challenges. Certainly, it was not easy for any sport to get this done. But the Sounders had themselves another solid season, finished second in the Western Conference standings, got themselves that nice win over LAFC 3-1 last week. Now they're playing tomorrow against Dallas. How do we feel? Like, how should Sounders fans feel right now? Obviously, it's a 2 seed versus 6 seed. That looks good when you just read it on paper. They haven't played Dallas, as far as I know, this season. I think the last time they played them was in the playoffs last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. Last year in the playoffs, and they, like I was saying earlier, they were supposed to face each other in the MLS's back tournament. And so this is one of those games where I think if we'd had it a bit earlier in the season, it could be pretty fascinating. I would argue that Seattle has the advantage, one, being at home, two, just much better up front. Yeah. But in this format, in this single leg format where you aren't going on goal aggregation, or you're going on, you can steal a game essentially on the road and then protect home field. It's a 1-game playoff now, and you've got to bring it every night. And Dallas is one of those teams. I think Minnesota as well, as they face Kansas City. They're two teams that you've got to bring it all 90 minutes, because it could be, one goal could be the difference. So for me, Seattle's really got to set the tone early on against a team like Dallas.
Yeah, I saw a stat that I think Seattle's like 11-0 when they score the first goal. I don't know how long the range was there. Obviously in soccer, more than I think a lot of other sports, scoring first is such a monumental thing. How big of a factor do you think that's going to be for this one?
For this one, it's going to be huge. It's going to be absolutely huge, because even though Seattle can play from behind and very good at scoring goals quickly, if you can apply pressure early on and set a tone, that is the biggest key in moving on to the second round, is setting a tone and getting some early points, because that takes pressure off of your goalie for a bit. And of course, we all know Stephen Fry can essentially save everything. So you don't want to be in that position, but it's a good position to be in. But you don't want to put yourself in that situation.
Sure. So last time these two teams met, Jordan Morris had a hat trick, which is pretty cool. Do you think that are we going to see something like that again from Morris? Do you expect a big game here?
Morris, Rui Diaz, I think that, Morris, Rui Diaz, you have Nico Ladero. Like, there's just so many guys up front that could score. I think one guy I definitely want to look at, I don't know if he's going to come off the bench for this one, but Brad Smith doing a great job organizing from the back. I think he's going to be key in this. It's going to be the usual suspects for Seattle. So I would expect the same cast of characters. The biggest thing for me is for them to start out strong. They started out strong against LAFC, and in LAFC, that game was kind of weird because they didn't have their complete complement of players, and LAFC fans are making that excuse, which in some ways I buy, but at the same time, it's also you have a team that's good enough to get to at least a conference final. So I think if Seattle can come out with that same type of energy, get that early goal in the first 20 to 30 minutes, apply some pressure, I think Seattle will move on.
So the Seahawks, I'm watching this game too, trying to give some updates. Carlos Hyde just scored a touchdown, but it looks like it got called back on a holding penalty. So hopefully they can try to punch it in again. They're up 17-9 right now. Got a lot of Seattle sports coming at you guys on this show. All right, Andrew. So the next question, obviously, first thing first for the Sounders. I know they're just focused on getting through FC Dallas, but they win that game. They get themselves a chance to play for the MLS Cup for the second year in a row. I guess my main question for you is Seattle wins the MLS Cup if. What are the things that need to happen? You've already addressed a few of them specifically for this game, but maybe what are some of those teams you expect them to see in that from the Eastern Conference in that championship game and what that might look like for a Sounders win?
I was sorry, can you repeat the question? It kind of cut out a little bit.
Sorry, yeah. I was just saying, like, the Sounders, obviously, if they win this game, they got a chance to play the champion from the Eastern Conference. Can you talk about what teams that might be and what they might need to do to win that game?
Oh, in the MLS Cup or in the conference finals?
The MLS Cup.
Oh, MLS Cup. It is a Columbus team that, you could argue that they are perhaps the second, and maybe even you could even make a case that they're one of the best teams remaining. They've definitely done the job of scoring goals, getting a lot of goals. Jazi Zardes is solid up front. New England is kind of the underdog story. They you take out Philadelphia, you shut them out. Then you go to Orlando, very solid Orlando side. You end up winning 3-1. That's a team that's, they've got nothing to lose. Bruce Arena, whether you like him or not, he has definitely put together some solid squads. So, I'm definitely fascinated in what that game is going to look like. But then, you have Seattle, or not Seattle, but you have a Sporting Kansas City and Minnesota in a game that if Seattle has to go to Kansas City, that's going to be one heck of a game because, the Sounders haven't had much success there. It's December. It's early December. So there could be some weather involved. I would be very fascinated to see a Seattle team outside of their element and a potential snow game in the Western Conference Final. But Minnesota is one of those teams that they're kind of in that New England form where any given day they are good enough to beat you. So Kansas City definitely needs to be on high alert for that one.
I know we're getting ahead of ourselves with a potential win here for the Sounders, but even if they don't, or even if they do, either way, I'm curious where you think the Sounders kind of rank among like really dominant Seattle kind of dynasties. Obviously the Legion of Boom era Seahawks get mentioned a lot, the mid-90s Mariners, the late 70s Sonics, and even the mid-90s Sonics as well. And then you have the Seattle Storm, who are probably the most dominant one, but don't get talked about nearly enough, unfortunately. I'm curious, just as somebody who doesn't follow the Sounders quite as closely as some of those other sports, just where you think this kind of the recent success that the Sounders have had kind of ranks among some of Seattle's like greatest dynasties.
It's going to be up there. It is absolutely going to be up there. And that's if they win. Even if they reach the MLS Cup final, I mean, you think about it, 3 out of the last 4 MLS Cup finals has featured a Seattle team.
Right.
And so, if you can make a 4th MLS Cup final or a 3rd in 4 years,
sure,
it's got to be up there. And I think that's the thing that's impressed so many people about the Seattle side.
Yeah, and you have two guys who are up for the Landon Donovan Award right now, the only team obviously with two guys in that situation. Is there something in terms of like the way that this team drafts or the way that they develop talent, like what allows them to be so successful year in and year out?
I think it's a mix of playing guys to their strengths,
Sure,
roster continuity. Because you look at some of the teams like LA, both LA sides, and there's a lot of star power there. But at the same time, one player on the Galaxy or LAFC, 2 or 3 players on Seattle make up for that one.
Right.
And if 2 or 3 of those guys are on, look out.
Right.
So I think it's it's solid front office. It is. I think Chris Henderson does a fantastic job of. And one thing he's told me is looking ahead to the next cycle. They're looking beyond transfer window A, and they're looking at transfer window B and C because they know, okay, what's our target allocated money looking like? What is the MLS landscape looking like? So, we're essentially in MLS 3.0.
Right.
I guarantee you by the time it hits, maybe summer 2021, the Sounders are already looking at MLS 3.5 and MLS 4.0 because you're going to have 4 new teams coming into the league. That means the talent level is going to be spread a little more thin, and you're going to have to look at the Tacoma Defiance. You're going to have to look at what your international market is looking like. So if there's a team that does a great job of that, it's Seattle, because everybody was obsessed with Atlanta. Like, oh man, Atlanta's doing their first or second year, and it's awesome. And it's like, that's great. That's awesome. But as you and I both know, especially in American sports, the financials across the board, whether it is NFL, MLS, whatever, dynasties are not supposed to exist.
Right.
So when you have what Seattle's done in terms of just getting all of these pieces together financially, it's working. Sometimes they stretch it a little thin, but you still have the opportunity to maintain some type of competitive effort. And, there's always a little luck involved.
Sure. Of
if
course.
you can strike at the right time, you're going to have success, year in, year out. And as long as everybody's happy, it works out.
Yeah, I think as somebody who just kind of pays attention to a lot of the big transactions, you see a lot of like the higher profile guys from the EPL who come over to America, oftentimes at the end of their career. A lot of those guys go to LA or they go to the bigger marketplaces, and Seattle seems to find success without doing as much of that. And it just seems like they have a very kind of dialed into what they want to do on the pitch. Like they know their strategy. You kind of touched on that a little bit earlier of maybe not giving into that stuff or maybe not having the opportunity to do that stuff because of the market issues. But it seems like they really are kind of, I don't know how much like analytics plays a role in soccer just in general, but also specifically with the Sounders. But it seems like they're really kind of plugged into what they do and what kind of players they want to get it done. And obviously they've had plenty of success.
And they absolutely do. I would say that they're a little more into the analytics than most people may think. And really, I think in general, that is where I would say MLS, but just all sports in general. And there has to be some type of analytical look to it. And one of the things that that the Sounders definitely do very well is they'll get a guy ahead of the transfer window. They'll get a guy, maybe 2 or 3 transfer windows ahead, just so you can already either you have your eye on that guy, or if you want to go ahead and bring him over here like Arriaga. I thought he did a fantastic job in that late season stretch. And one of the things that, I was thinking about, in terms of, because he started off slow. He started off slow last year, But once he started to hit his stride in the postseason a little bit, you think, okay, that's a guy that maybe late 2020, early 2021, he comes over here, everybody's bidding on it. But
Right.
Seattle got out in front. Same with João Paulo. He's a guy that some teams are looking at and some teams are trying to go after. But, Seattle got in, and he's been a pretty good player for him.
Got to stay ahead of the curve. That's how you keep your advantages, especially as not the biggest market teams out there.
Right.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Andrew and I are going to pivot over to talking about Pac-12 football. We got the big upset with Oregon State over Oregon. We got a ton of cancellations, which make it a little bit harder, but we're going to try to look at what the Pac-12 picture might look like at the end of the season and how that could impact the college football playoffs right after this.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. You're listening to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
Oh, my goodness. Carson Wentz threw maybe the worst interception that I have ever seen in my entire life. It was the most accurate throw that he's thrown this game, just hit Quandre Diggs right in the chest. That was absolutely brutal.
So I refreshed my Twitter timeline.
Yeah.
Just to see, because, when you scroll, you kind of miss like a minute or so. So I'm like, okay, let me just refresh. And then all of a sudden I just see WTF Carson Wentz. Oh my God, Carson Wentz, why? What are you doing? Carson Wentz's time. And so I just tweeted, I was like, so I refreshed my timeline and now I'm showing up at a Carson Wentz wake. Awesome.
It was, when you get a chance to see the highlight, he clearly was a miscommunication, but there was nobody near Quandre Diggs. He was alone on an island. It was so brutal.
I feel bad for him in a way. In a small way, I feel bad for Carson Wentz, because if you think about it, his first or second year, or first year in the league, he gets injured.
Yep.
Gets injured in the playoffs. Eagles don't go as far. And then, second year, they're rolling. Best record in the league.
Right.
And then 3 or 4 weeks before the season's over, season-ending injury.
Yeah, it's hurt again.
He gets a Super Bowl ring, but it's kind of sort of not his Super Bowl ring.
Yeah.
And then it's like, hey, everything's great. Carson Wentz is healthy. And then this.
Yeah, it's been so brutal.
It sucks. I feel bad for him, but Jesus Christ, Carson.
I know. No, I feel the same way. People are like, is he the worst quarterback in the NFL? And performance-wise, he's pretty close, but talent-wise, no way. He's better than that. It's not coming together for whatever reason.
He needs a new franchise. The issue is, where is he going to go? That's my question.
Unless the Jets get rid of Darnold, I guess, but I don't know. There's just not a lot.
I don't think it's all really on Darnold. I think Darnold needs. Is God gonna bless the Jets with the coach and a coordinator from from the heavens? It hasn't happened in 50 years, and probably not now.
Yeah, I don't think so. I know. I'm curious what happens if Darnold, say Roethlisberger retires and he goes to Pittsburgh with a good coach and a good group. I think it'd be pretty good. I think he'd be
him and Juju were teammates at USC. It works.
Yeah,
I wouldn't hate that, honestly.
I know it'd be kind of fun. I don't know if Big Ben's going anywhere.
No, he won't. He won't go nowhere.
No. Anyway, so the next topic we're going to discuss before Carson Wentz blessed us with whatever that was is some Pac-12 football. And it's been a obviously super strange season. I hate that pretty much whenever I talk about any sport or any topic, it feels like it has to go through COVID-19 and everything, because it's been such a big part of sports, obviously, and everything in 2020. But for the Pac-12 in particular, because they started so late and they it seemed like we're trying to promote this plan of we're going to start later and it's going to be safer and it's going to be better. And what actually happened is they started later. It's not safer. The states protocols didn't change or got more strict in some situations, and they just had way less opportunities to actually reschedule games. So now you have some teams who've played one game, some teams who've played 4 games. You have USC playing on Sunday this week against Washington State, maybe, if that game even happens. It's extremely strange. And then to pile on top of all of that, the only team that anybody really expected to be good just lost to the Oregon State Beavers. So chaos is like underselling what's going on in the Pac-12. But I guess we could just start with kind of the decision making that led them to this. How did you feel about them deciding to play late and what it's kind of done for this conference so far?
And you follow me on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a big advocate and I've been against the fact that they're trying to return because I knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
The COVID climate was not friendly
right
at that point, and you knew things were going to get worse. And so I'm just like, I hate to say I told y'all, but the very thing that we were all saying was going to happen,
right?
It's happening, and it's so tough to watch because once again, going back to earlier, doom scrolling. We're sitting there, just all right. What game is getting canceled today? I mean, we had to celebrate 100 games getting canceled this season on Saturday because I figured, okay, it's going to be a matter of days, before, and it wasn't even maybe an hour. Yeah. And then you had, there's another cancellation, and you're just like,
yep,
what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing here? And the Pac-12, I heard something today where Arizona State's only played one game. Like Arizona State, I feel bad. Like in some cases, because the kids, it's not their fault,
right?
For some of it, it's not their fault,
right?
But at the same time, I feel bad for the universities putting these kids in a situation because they aren't getting compensated.
Mm-hmm.
They are essentially the face of their university's COVID struggles right now,
right?
I was reading something where UCLA had I believe at the UCLA Med Center, they had nurses on strike because the testing was going towards football players,
right,
and not enough for frontline workers.
Jeez.
What are we doing here?
Right.
Like it's that Taylor Twellman gif. Like, what are we doing here? I wake up with that gif in my head, and I say it to myself at least twice a day.
Yeah. Well, you make
that, everything's fine.
Yeah, we're good. You make a good point because it's easy to blame the players. Like when you hear that story of like these nurses are protesting because these players are getting the test ahead of them. It's not the player's fault, but that's how it's going to be perceived a lot of the time. And you're treating these players like essential workers, like literally what we have determined is the definition of essential workers, and they're literally not getting paid at all, which is massively problematic. It's been problematic for decades that's not happening. And in this situation for these kids to be, risking themselves, risking their families to play football, to make the university money when they're not making money is, bordering on a legitimate tragedy. Like it's like one of the most saddest things that's happening.
I'm afraid. I said this earlier in the season, and when teams were kind of delayed in starts, I said, this is going to end with a player or coach passing away.
Yeah.
We are definitely tempting fate. And, they're talking about, it doesn't hurt the young. It doesn't hurt. COVID does not care. COVID does not pick an age group. They don't pick a race. They don't pick a creed. Like it is just keep yourself safe. And it's so tough to watch. And I think in a way, and you may disagree with me on this, it's made the football a bit more timid at times.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's so easy for people to say, well, it doesn't impact young people, and like in a lot of cases it doesn't. But you have like 29-year-old Eduardo Rodriguez played for the Boston Red Sox who developed myocarditis. Like you've seen it with other guys too. Von Miller said that he was like bedridden for 3 weeks, and like I can think of maybe 5 people on the planet who are in better shape physically than Von Miller. So like,
he said he still hasn't recovered.
It's still impacting him. It's absolutely nuts. Anyway, football is still happening. There are still games, a few of them at least, to be discussed. Not nearly as many as in typical seasons, and not very many left to go. The season is nearly over already for the Pac-12 at least. The most notable game that happened over the last week, obviously, was this Oregon State game. The Ducks were ranked, I think, just inside the top 15 or maybe just outside the top 15.
Yeah, around 13. Yeah.
13, they were... Them and USC were the only ranked teams. USC is technically undefeated, but has not looked very good, really, in any of their games. I think Pac-12's only chance at really having a team have any relevance was the Ducks. And then they went out and gave up 41 points to the Oregon State Beavers. I think Oregon State's maybe a little better than some people thought, but not nearly. This shouldn't have happened. And people were blaming Tyler Shuck, the Oregon quarterback, which is hilarious to me because he did not give up 41 points to a bad team. I don't know how much this game you got a chance to check out, but what were your thoughts seeing Oregon kind of throw away the entire Pac-12 season with this one?
I'm not shocked, but at the same time, you're watching this all go down, and you're like, "Yeah, that's about how it would go." Like, because if you think about it, Washington took care of business. Mm-hmm. If Washington and Oregon both took care of business, more than likely, your final game of the season in December is going to be Washington at Oregon, Pac-12 North Championship on the line. Right. More than likely, both those teams are at least top 12, maybe top 10, if the ball bounces their way. I think Washington doesn't have a playoff argument. I don't think they do, but I think they still can manage a way to go undefeated in the regular season. I think the team is good enough to do it. You can't have slow starts like you did against Utah. Sure. But it was just, watching that Oregon game, it's everything you expect out of the Civil War. The wackiness. I'm still called Civil War. The wackiness, are you serious? And the fog, all of that you just expect. And you're like, this is going to be one of those games. Yeah. This is going to be one of those weird games that, it's a highlighter against the orange marker. Crayola could have really sponsored that game. I would have been proud. But it's Oregon doing what Oregon does, letting teams hang around, putting teams in position to succeed, putting the other team in position to steal victory from you, because Oregon should have won that game, I'd say by a touchdown or so. And Oregon State is much better than they have been the last few years. But to a man, you've got the better side. Yeah. You've got to close out those games. And this is why the Pac-12 has the reputation it does, because you just can't trust these teams. And, you were mentioning USC. I think USC is a pretty decent side. Yeah. Their issue is they're this agent of chaos that it is, Clay Helton suddenly realizes with 5 minutes left in the game, if I lose, I'm fired. So he goes into he turns into 04 Pete Carroll, and everything works out, and you're just like, Clay. Clay.
I've watched every minute of every USC game this year. And
I'm so sorry.
It has been a roller coaster. It is, I don't have
a lot of talent. They have a lot of talent.
They have a great receiving core. They're a wide receiver right now. You look at Michael Pittman's doing great. Juju, Robert Woods, Nelson Aguilar is having a good year. They put a ton of great elite receiving talent in the NFL. Their group right now with Tyler Vaughns, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brew McCoy, Drake London, they have a great group, and yet They have this air raid offense, a great quarterback, a great group of receivers, and it doesn't work like 80% of the game. I don't know what's going on.
So I was afraid because I'm a huge Notre Dame fan, as you know.
Uh-huh. Yep.
I was watching Notre Dame at USC in 2018.
Sure. Yeah.
And Notre Dame had to finish undefeated in the regular season. You got to go to USC. There were elements of that game, and that's the moment I swore if you would put a gun to my head, I would have said Clay Helton's going to get fired the next day.
Yeah.
Because they were, spreading, going 4 and 5 wide.
Yeah.
They were just absolutely shredding the Irish on those first 2 or 3 series of the game. And I'm like, oh, God. Like, this is going to be the game where USC returns. Like, this is Goliath will wake up and God help us all. And then you're just like, Clay, what are you doing?
Yeah, what happened?
Why are you going to single back? Like, what are you doing? And then 2019 came.
Yeah.
Saw how that happened. Well, I thought 2019 was hilarious because the one game that they kind of threw the monkey wrench into everything, I don't know if it was either Utah or Stanford, but it was the same night that Washington played Cal. Yeah. And I was at that game until like 2 a.m. in the stands. Nice. Awesome.
It's an hour delay.
Right. And so I'm sitting there like on the concourse watching this game with a bunch of old heads, and we're just like, oh, USC is going to be – and like they ended up winning the game, but you're just like, I don't trust that team at all. And then a few weeks later, USC comes in. You're like, what are they doing? And I was sitting in the USC section because my buddy had tickets there. And like all these USC people are just so pissed at Clay Helton. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, these people really hate this man. So as a Notre Dame fan, I'm loving it because I'm like, I hate this school so much.
Right.
So I'm kind of like getting a thrill out of watching you guys suffer. But no, USC, I think it would be pretty appropriate for 2020 in the Pac-12 if USC ends up playing in the Pac-12 championship game, winning it with like a 3-0, 4-0 record, and you're just like, how?
That is exactly what I think is going to happen because they got Washington State, and if that game gets played, I think they'll win that one. Washington State hasn't played in a few weeks, and I don't think they're all that good. And then they'll sneak into the Pac-12 championship game, and they'll play Washington or Oregon, and they'll sneak an ugly victory, and it'll just be terrible. It'll just be bad.
No, here's what I think is going to happen: Washington or Oregon plays USC in the championship game. Yep. That's when USC's offense just explodes.
Yeah, like 48.
Right, like this is like Pete Carroll, Steve Sarkisian, they're all back, and it's like like USC fans are going to sit there and celebrate like, oh yeah, we're back, and it's like, no, you aren't, because you're going to go to the Fiesta Bowl against BYU, and they're going to completely shut you out like 48-0. So congratulations.
And between those two games, Clay Helton will get like a 3-year extension, and BYU and USC fans will realize like, oh no, what have we done? This is the worst win.
You ever seen that movie Anchor? Yeah, I'm sure you've seen Anchor.
Oh, of course,
So when Veronica Corningstone gets the anchor job. Yeah, and they scroll down the row of the guys, and they're just like, no. That's what I get with USC fans every time Clay Helton pulls one out, and they're just like, no, this was not supposed to happen. Yeah. I'm just like, guys, this is what you get.
I mean, Seahawks fans and USC fans are similar in that they're almost always more mad after wins in a lot of ways. You see it so much.
USC fans, I totally get.
Yeah.
Seahawks fans, I don't get it. I'm a tortured Vikings fan. I don't understand why you guys are upset after a win. I mean, we beat Carolina, yesterday? And I'm just like, oh, God.
Just relieved.
We didn't wreck the car, but we got home.
Yeah, no, Seahawks fans are a grumpy bunch for reasons that I think are oftentimes unnecessary. Yes, the coaching is old school. Yes, they let teams stay in games even like they're doing tonight, but they win a lot of the time. They win 11 or 12 games a year. They make the playoffs every year since except 2017 for the last 8, 9, 10 years. It's fine. Things are fine. My dad grew up a Lions fan. That's terrible. That is worst. I followed them a little bit. I've given up now. I love Matthew Stafford. The I loved Calvin Johnson. I liked Barry Sanders. I'm glad they both left early. It's just not a fun franchise to be around. So yeah, people who are Seahawks fans, you have it a lot better than a lot of other franchises. Better than the Vikings, better than the Lions, better than the Jets and the Eagles who were playing. I mean, the Eagles won recently, but woof, doesn't look good right now.
You tell Eagles fans they won a Super Bowl 3 years ago. That was 3 years ago, man. Bro. They'll throw like a Philly cheesesteak at you or something. I like Philly fan, but I'm also afraid of Philly fan.
Yeah, I think you have to be a little afraid of Phillies fans. If you're not, then you're probably at risk, or you're like insane, because you should be a little afraid of them.
I kind of want to. I do one day want to wear an opposing jersey at the link, just to see what happens. But a brother doing that probably.
That's risky. That's risky. All right, so back to UW, I guess. That's right. where we left off. They're 3-0. They got a date with Stanford on Saturday, which I don't want to say should be a win because it's 2020 and it's the Pac-12, so who the hell knows, but is presumably a potential win, puts them 4-0 heading into that game against Oregon. Obviously, it's a mess. This whole season's a mess. We've addressed that at large, but with a new coach, with Jimmy Lake coming in, with an offensive coordinator that people were pretty apprehensive about, how do you think Husky fans, 3-0 heading into at least one more winnable game, you got to feel pretty good, right?
3-0. I don't want to say it's a winnable game. They should be favored. I think they are favored. I think so, yeah. Fine. But Stanford it's old school Stanford. It's like late Harbaugh, early David Shaw, yeah, where they're that knuckleball pitcher, and if you can't get to them early, they become really aggravating. And so I think it's going to be one of those games. I think it's going to be one of those games where you've got to set a tone. You've got to issue that early knockout. And this is no slight against Stanford, but Washington should win the game. I think Washington will probably be favored, but Stanford is just so good. They're the type of team that they'll just keep chopping wood, keep going along. And if the game is late in the fourth and Stanford has a chance to win, that's a team that they find a way every time. So you just got to knock them out early.
Yeah, they're a team that doesn't go away. They really don't like to go away. And UW, I don't think that they have the offensive firepower to put a team away like that. We've seen them explode offensively this year, so it's there. But if they don't put up quick points against Stanford, I think it's going to be kind of one of those games that just has people kind of nervous for 58 minutes or so, like watching USC all year.
Oh man! Oh god! No. I'm very fascinated to see how this game, if it's played. I'm very fascinated to see how this Washington team reacts, because I don't think they were ready for that Utah punch in the.
No, they weren't.
They did, but they responded well. I won't run through a wall for Jimmy Lake, but at the same time, they've got to respond early. They've got to respond early. Either you respond early to that first punch, or you land that first haymaker and put Stanford in a position where they have to play from behind.
Man, using boxing references when talking about UW when we just had our Nate Robinson conversation is probably going to give people some flashbacks early on.
It was enjoyable. It sucked, but we all kind of got to laugh. If you haven't laughed about Nate Robinson getting knocked out, I'm sorry. Yeah. And if Nate's listening to this, dude, I'm sorry.
I think he's probably laughing. He will at some point.
Well, he got $600 for it, so congratulations.
There you go. Making his money.
PS5.
All right. So we kind of talked Pac-12 predictions already. I guess the last thing is we got that Oregon-Washington game coming up December 12th, assuming it happens. Seems very likely to be the game that determines your Pac-12 North champion. What do you see coming out of that game? We talked kind of about what UW has to do against Stanford. What do they got to do against an Oregon squad that is kind of up and down?
Man, I want to say Oregon's the type of team that they are very, very good.
Yeah,
but when you look at some of the the UCLA win was kind of wonky.
Yeah.
They look very impressive against Stanford. UCLA, they were playing against a team that wasn't as experienced, but that UCLA team hung around, and I even said, I was like, that's a game Oregon should probably be a little leery of.
Yeah.
They responded well, but you lose that rivalry game against an Oregon State team that, although they were improved, you were clearly the better side.
Right.
This Washington game, I can't get a read on it, and that might feel like a cop out, but at the same time, Washington should win that game. I would give them a slight edge, but especially on defense.
Yeah.
But Oregon is so up and down, you really just don't know. I'll give Washington a slight edge purely off of Oregon's inconsistency, but kind of like the Stanford game, you've got to come out and establish something early because Oregon has the capability of putting up points on you like crazy. The issue is they're also giving up points like crazy. So if you get into a shootout, I would say advantage Oregon.
Yeah.
If it's a defensive struggle, Washington definitely has the edge there.
No doubt. Yeah, I think I'm leaning Washington in that game too. But if you told me that, Oregon's going to win by 3 touchdowns, I would be a little surprised, but I'd be like, okay. Like I can kind of see that happening too. Like if they get out early, it's just these teams are so unpredictable. We're talking about 13 days away in 2020. Who the hell knows what's going to be happening, man? It's so.
That game might be a Sunday?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it might be played on a Tuesday, man. We really don't know anything about what's going to be going down.
It's a school night, kids. Go ahead and play.
Just play.
I love sports in 2020 because literally it's just, hey, we're going to schedule a game in 2 weeks, and then there's other schools that are like, hey, we're going to schedule a game 3 hours from now, so get 2 or 3 cameras out to the field. Cool.
Yeah, I was reading. So Virginia lost to the University of San Francisco in basketball, and that game got scheduled 3 days ahead of time. And I think USF agreed to play that game while at the airport. They got a call and they were like, "Yeah, okay, we'll play them." And so then they came out and beat them, which is crazy. But it's everybody's like, "Well, Virginia wasn't prepared." Neither was USF. They didn't know what they were getting into. They just showed up.
And I think for college basketball, it's a bit more. To me, it's a bit more dangerous if you're scheduling that short. Short game because there's so much when you look at basketball film, look at match tendencies, all that. For football, it feels like it's a bit easier because everybody's kind of going with there's a lot of teams who probably haven't even installed half of their playbook. They're just going off of, this is what we ran well, this is what we want to try. I would be shocked if somebody's actually installed, if somebody not named Alabama has installed a full playbook.
Yeah, and I think it's good and bad because I think we talked about this game earlier. UW got punched in the mouth by Utah really early, and I think part of that was because Utah looked god awful against USC, and so they watched all that tape. And Utah has, I think, lost 11 starters last year, so you have to kind of watch that tape to get a sense of who these guys are. They look like crap, and you're like, okay, this is what they're going to do, and then they do a bunch of different stuff and just kind of blitz you really brutally, and that's tough. UW responded well. Credit to Coach Lake and everybody, but that's what's so hard is you don't know what you're going to get.
It's so difficult coaching these days, and for a team like Oregon, and that's the thing. Oregon could come out next week, like a house on fire, and we're like, oh crap, Oregon's back. Mm-hmm. We don't know if they're back or not.
Exactly.
Same thing with Washington. Mm-hmm. Washington, that second half, absolutely tremendous.
Right. Yeah.
Flip a coin. Whatever happens.
Well, and people like to use this team did this against this team, so therefore, and it's that's always been invalid. But people are well, look at how much USC struggled against Arizona, and then what Washington did to Arizona. And I'm like, if you think that means that Washington is going to crush USC, it's not true. They might. It's totally possible, but that's not why. It was just this weird thing that happened where Arizona played really well against USC and then got crushed by the Huskies.
This season has been so weird, and for the SEC, you kind of figure out ACC, you kind of figure out, but for the Big Ten and Pac-12, Ohio State probably makes the playoff. I'm not a fan of that, especially if they don't, end up playing in their conference championship game. but
Right.
we don't know how good these teams are. I mean, look at
Yeah.
Penn State.
Right.
Penn State might be the best 1-5 team we've ever seen because if you think about it, they played some close games. They've looked good in some of those losses. They look really bad in some others. But it's a season where you just don't know. And we kind of have some type of inside knowledge and a bit of expertise on it. But even then, there's some games and there's some results I look at and I'm just like, I have no idea what just happened.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that kind of leads into the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the college football playoff and what that's going to look like. And obviously, I'm not going to ask you to make specific predictions because that's ludicrous in the year 2020. I think we've probably safely determined my first question, which was, does the Pac-12 have any chance in the college football playoff? Yeah, I think maybe.
I'm not going to say no.
Okay.
And the only reason I won't say no is because there's a lot that can happen.
Sure.
And really in college football in general,
Sure.
there's a lot that can happen. I think there is a path.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an absolute path. Unfortunately, it does involve a team or teams not being eligible for their conference championship game or missing out on games. Like there is a path. The issue is, especially for Washington and USC to a lesser extent, you're rounding the quarter turn and you're still in the stall. Like you are so far behind. So it's gonna be very difficult. I'm not absolutely gonna say, oh yeah, it's completely dead and buried. There's a path, but it's a very narrow path.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there's a good possibility that a undefeated Pac-12 team could occur, not make the playoff, go to a New Year's Six bowl, win that, and you're in the everything you could have done in the season, you finished undefeated, but you weren't in the playoff.
Yeah.
So I mean it's a very slim chance. Like I said, I'm not going to completely say no, but that's a tightrope over the Brooklyn Bridge. So if you want to try it, go ahead.
Yeah.
I will do it.
I think, you look at UW and Utah is not a great win, but it's not a bad win. Arizona's not a great win, but if they pull off a win against Oregon, if they beat USC in the Pac-12 championship, yeah, I think you have to they have to have a case like that. That's a somewhat of a case. I don't know. It would probably depend on other teams. Do you take them over an Ohio State team that didn't play in their championship? Ohio State's a better team, but how do you make that determination? Like, it's tough.
Ohio State's a better team. I think that Ohio State can say their body of work. I mean, it's a body.
Yeah. Right.
Your best win is going to be against Indiana, which in most years, that's congratulations, you beat Indiana. Here's your sticker. This year, it's a good win.
Yeah.
But, Michigan is Michigan, which is not Michigan State is the type of team that it's a solid win. I'm not going to give Michigan State and Mel Tucker a lot of credit. I think they're very inconsistent, but at the same time, if you can soundly beat them, I would argue that's a decent to solid win.
Sure.
Washington's going to need help. They're going to need possibly Notre Dame to lose to a Wake Forest or a North Carolina. I think if Notre Dame reaches the ACC championship game unblemished and loses to Clemson, I think both of them will still get in.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, I mean, you're going to need some help from the group of five. BYU is going to need to lose a game, which I don't think they will. No. Cincinnati's. They still got the conference championship game, so I think if they can win that, there's an opportunity. But yeah, no, it's going to be one of those for the Pac-12. It's going to be difficult.
Yeah, that was my last question. You kind of already answered it, but BYU and Cincinnati, being in that conversation for this year, like you'd probably take them over an undefeated UW team, I'm guessing, right? Maybe.
Cincinnati, I would probably BYU, honestly, and I said this in October.
Mm-hmm.
BYU deserves, if they finish the season unblemished, absolutely deserve a playoff spot.
Yeah.
And then that means BYU has to get in over an undefeated Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
If Ohio State if Ohio State isn't eligible for the conference championship game,
mm-hmm.
I can't put you in the playoff. It sucks,
right.
but I just can't put you in because those other teams, they also did the work. And BYU was essentially blowing teams out, not knowing who they play the next week.
Yeah.
Very consistent. Cincinnati's been consistent as well. I think that either one of those teams, and there's a small possibility they might match up in the next 2 weeks. So the winner of that definitely gets in over UW. But no, I don't want to kill all hopes for Husky fans.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, it's kind of like Santa isn't real, but I'll let you think about it.
Yeah.
You can hope. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'll give you some hope because technically you're still in it.
Right. It would be, man, I can imagine the outcry if BYU gets in over UW when there was this perceived inability to schedule each other. BYU didn't want to schedule it.
BYU, I will defend BYU partially.
Yep.
Because if that game is scheduled and then it gets canceled,
mm-hmm.
if I'm BYU, I still at least make an effort to put that game on the schedule.
Yeah.
And I think the voters in the playoff poll looked at that as like, wait a minute. So you guys had an opportunity to schedule them
mm-hmm.
and you didn't?
Yeah.
I think they kind of bridled at that a little bit, and they were like, "Okay, you know what? If you're gonna act like that,
mm-hmm.
we might slide you down because you aren't making that effort." But
right.
I understand BYU's case, but at the same time, that's a game you still gotta at least try to get on the schedule. But
yeah, I think they had to take a shot at it. And they didn't. But I get why too, because they could have just had it canceled on them last minute for no fault of their own. And then they're just out of game. So it's a crappy situation for all sides. But yeah, it will suck if this costs BYU a chance at that. But at the same time, if you felt confident enough, go out and beat UW, and then you leave no doubt. If you win that UW game and you win the rest of your games, I think there's very little doubt at that point that they're in.
And now in a way they're kind of, I don't want to say that they're scrambling.
Yeah.
But if somebody, they're definitely looking at open dates, and they're definitely looking across the national landscape for any Power 5 that might come open one weekend. It would not be a bad idea if they were just to, essentially say, hey, if you need a game, come here, or we'll go there. I mean, I saw that tweet, that said anywhere, anytime. I'm like, all right.
Except Seattle.
Yeah. It's funny because Utah almost did it. And so I had a tweet, during the game. I was like, somewhere, BYU was like, let me in, with somebody screaming and banging on a door. That could have been you.
Yep.
You could have had the national showcase. It's not the 7 p.m. out west,
right.
Friday night game against Houston. You could have had a national showcase. Yeah. I think they'll still make an argument for the playoff, but it's that not having that Power 5 game definitely leaves some doubt out there.
Yeah, I think it hurt them for sure. Andrew, my dude, thank you so much for coming on. For those of you listening, you can follow Andrew on Twitter at AhamTNT. lots of memes, as he has referenced a handful of times. Lots of times he suggests games for you to go watch and what channel to go to, which I have utilized in the past. So I appreciate that.
No problem.
Andrew, thanks again. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. I had a blast, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go to another quick break, and then when we get back, we'll recap this Seahawks game. They did win. For those of you who are not watching, they pulled off a very close win over a not good Eagles squad. But you know what? A win is a win. They are 8-3. We'll talk about what that means, what that looks like for the playoff picture right after this.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. You're listening to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
All right, welcome back. So like I said before we went to our final break, the Seattle Seahawks did win. They pulled out a win against the Philadelphia Eagles 23-17, not 17-9, which is what it looked like the score might be, which is previous Seahawks game against the Eagles has been that score. It seems like they really struggle against this team. I don't really know why. Obviously, in previous years when Philadelphia was really good, that made a little bit more sense. They are a well-coached team, but I don't know what it is. I mean, I know some things. One thing, the Seahawks play down to just about everybody. That's a very classic Seahawks thing. I think they're, we could talk at length about Pete Carroll's offensive schemes, and we have in previous episodes. If folks want to go back and listen to them, they're available on YouTube. But it's kind of this team where they didn't run the ball particularly well in this game. They don't do enough. They don't put up enough points quickly, especially against bad teams. They just haven't been able to do that. We saw a game here where the Seahawks, pretty much the entire offense was DK Metcalf. He had over 100 yards, 177 yards, 10 receptions in this game. Nobody else had more than 23 yards receiving. Chris Carson had 41 yards on the ground and a touchdown. That was an 8 carries, so they didn't utilize him a lot, which makes sense coming back from the injury. Carlos Hyde had 15 carries for 22 yards, which is awful. He had one 8-yard carry, which means the rest of the time was 14 carries for 16 yards, which is truly terrible. He did have that nice long run that was called back on a holding penalty, so he did appear to score a touchdown and was not credited with it. But at the end of the day, the Seahawks won. They are now 8-3 on the season. That keeps them in first place in the NFC West. They were already in first place after the Rams lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but now they maintain that first place lead at 8-3. They are tied with the Green Bay Packers for second in the NFC behind the New Orleans Saints, who are 9-2. So they're in a good spot. They're in a better spot because their next 3 games are against the New York Giants, the New York Jets, and the Washington football team. So I don't want to guarantee 3 wins because it's the NFL and it's 2020, and you just should not be guaranteeing anything. If you've been listening to me and Andrew's lengthy conversation, then you know that it's really silly to try to predict anything like that. Yes, the NFL has not had any games canceled, but you never know. Also want to shout out the Seattle Seahawks real quick before we keep going on. They're the only team in the NFL that has not had positive COVID tests. That is incredible, and that is a legitimate thing that should be celebrated. I don't know exactly how they did it. Maybe they've gotten freakishly lucky. Maybe they are incredibly strict with the players. I don't know. I have not been around the team this year because very few media have been around the team this year, which is probably part of a contributing factor here for them being able to be so safe with this situation. So they have not done anything to jeopardize any future games. Hopefully that will continue to be the case. But assuming the Seahawks do get Giants, Jets, Washington. The Giants right now, Daniel Jones is banged up. I don't know if the Seahawks will get a chance to see him. The Giants are an okay football team. They're a pretty bad football team without Daniel Jones. They're not very good with him either. If we're being honest, he's pretty average, but they'll particularly struggle without him. And if that's the case, then I think that that's a pretty easy one. The Jets are terrible. Adam Gase should not continue to be a head coach in the NFL. Poor Sam Darnold, again, addressed him previously, but he is not getting any help. The team has lost so many talented players with Le'Veon Bell leaving and a handful of other guys, and they're just there's just no firepower there, no punch, no real reason to assume the Seahawks will lose that game, even if they play down like they did against this Eagles squad. I have a hard time imagining that they're not capable of even accidentally winning that game just by virtue of the Jets having a poor offensive game plan, a not very good defense, and not enough talent to make up for those deficiencies. And then you have Washington. They're interesting. I think that they, I'm not expecting the Seahawks to drop that one necessarily. I think Washington will give them a little bit of a challenge. They absolutely pounded the Cowboys this past week, 41-16. I think that says more about the Cowboys than it does about Washington. But still, Gibson ran 20 carries for 115 yards in that one. Alex Smith has been an incredible story. For him to be healthy and playing football again after what he underwent with that horrific leg injury, nearly dying from it, the massive complications from it, just ever even walk again. I think the sentiment around the league has been if he completes one pass, then he is just a guaranteed for the comeback player of the year. And at this point, he's completed a lot more than one pass. He's actually played pretty well. He's not a top quarterback in the league. He's probably not even top half quarterback in the league, but the fact that he is a quarterback in the NFL is legitimately incredible. And against Dallas, he completed 19 of 26 passes for 149 yards and a touchdown. Not a great night, but enough to get a win over Andy Dalton and the really, really, really struggling Cowboys team. So Washington 4-7. Decent defensive team. Chase Young obviously is a big name there. Montez Sweat's a guy I really liked coming out of the draft and was hoping the Seahawks would get him. He's having a pretty solid season for them over there. Had the interception against the Cowboys. So yeah, I think that those three games should be wins. I hesitate to say that for lots of reasons, but if we assume that they are, then you have a Seahawks team that is 11-3 going into their final two regular season games against the Rams and the 49ers. Obviously, the Rams will be an extraordinarily difficult game. The Rams have had Seattle's number for years and years. I think I talked about this either last episode or the one before that, but I think the Rams are a Greg Zuerlein missed field goal away from having beat Seattle pretty much maybe every game since 2017. I'm not exactly sure, but it's been a tremendous struggle for Coach Carroll to beat McVay and the Rams. And if they lose this game, that puts them at 11-4. If the Rams win out up to that point, then both teams are 11-4, and obviously Los Angeles would have the tiebreaker there. So that would put them in a tricky spot where they're pretty much not going to win the conference. And then that puts them in a much more difficult spot for a playoff picture. So ultimately this season is going to come down to this Rams game. I think that that's kind of been the case for a while. It seemed like it was shaken out that way. Obviously the loss to the Bills hurt them. And the ugly loss to the Rams certainly didn't do them any favors. But at the end of the day, we kind of knew that it was going to come down to this game. And then you have that 49ers game, which is a very obvious trap game. I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that game will still be very, very important. The 49ers are not the team that they once were. They have taken a pretty big dive this year, but I think discounting them at all is definitely not a smart plan. I mean, they just beat the Rams. They just beat the Rams last week, 23-20. They're 5-6 on the season. They've had all sorts of issues at their quarterback position with Jimmy Garoppolo playing poorly and then not playing at all because he's had injuries. Nick Mullins looked okay against the Rams. He threw for 252 yards, but he did not throw a touchdown. Passer rating of 77, which is not great. But Deebo Samuel was incredible, 11 receptions for 133 yards in that game. And they did rush a touchdown with Mostert, who is back and healthy, and a big, big benefit for them to have him back too. So those two games are going to be extremely tough for the Seattle squad. I think the 49ers will forever be a tough game for the Seahawks. So I don't think there's any reason to discount them, but 13-3 is not outside the realm of possibilities. I would probably venture 12-4 would be my guess. And then the tricky part is, what does that do to the Seahawks playoff picture? Who are they going to play? If they can win the NFC West, I think their most likely matchup, at least now, there's still obviously lots of football to be played, is against Tampa Bay. And that could be super, super interesting. I think Russ versus Brady in a playoff game is like the epitome of fun. I think that there are reasons to believe that Seattle's matchup against Tampa Bay could be very challenging for them. Obviously, the Bruce Arians, they run that heavy air raid offense. They're letting Brady throw the ball. They have Chris Godwin out wide, exceptional receiver on that team. Ronald Jones has been used as a receiver quite a bit, just caught a touchdown last week. They're scary. They're going to be really good offensively. Gronk has looked better. He had 106 yards against the Chiefs last week. I had mentioned Godwin. Obviously, Mike Evans is around. Cameron Brate had a good game. They still have Leonard Fournette in the backfield. I think this would be a super, super fun game. I think there are other matchups that might be more preferred for Seahawks fans. Those of you who are, remembering that Carlos Dunlap got hurt in this game, as far as I know, we don't have an update on him. I will let people know if I hear anything differently. But if Dunlap is going to miss any time at all, you already have a really struggling pass rush. I mean, massively struggling pass rush. It's gotten better. They've used Jamal Adams as a blitzer, and that's gone well. That has looked good, and that is Shaquille Griffin's healthy, and they have some other guys back and healthy. Quandre Diggs had his nice interception in this game. So they're looking better defensively. Their pass defense is getting better. Of course, it had nowhere to go but up. It was literally league leading, potentially record breaking poor pass defense in NFL history, which is granted is always going to skew towards recent times because the passing has become a lot more prevalent, but still it's not a record that you want for a team that prides itself on defense, for a team still coached by Pete Carroll, who founded the Legion of Boom and created one of the greatest NFL defenses of all time, to still be there, to still be trying the same things, and to have it be one of the worst defenses in NFL history in terms of protecting against the pass is definitely not the trajectory that you want. And then if you do end up running into a team like Tampa Bay, where they're going to throw the ball, they're going to spread it out wide, they're going to look for their tight ends, a spot that has historically been weak for Seahawks defensive players. And Gronk is not the player he used to be, but like I said, he got 106 yards against a decent Kansas City defense. What's he going to do against Seattle if he's healthy and Brady's healthy and Seattle's running their 4-3 base defense? Are they going to put an outside linebacker on him? Are they going to try to put a nickel back on him? Is Ugo Amadi going to match him? Is KJ Wright going to match him? Gronk's not even the biggest concern. Then you have Godwin out wide, Evans. It's going to be a tough one. I wish I was more confident about the Seahawks beating Tampa Bay if that's the matchup that they get. Obviously, Seattle's defense played great tonight against a not as good Philadelphia squad. We've seen them look better in recent weeks. If Dunlap ends up being totally healthy and fine, then great. LJ Collier has kind of stepped up in recent days as well. So I think that there's some reason for optimism here. But Tampa Bay is the matchup that a lot of people are kind of identifying. They would have to come out to Seattle. Maybe that's an advantage. Again, no fans, most likely. I guess that has not been confirmed, but likely there will not be fans. That does kind of dilute a little bit of that advantage, although weather could be a factor for the Seattle at that point, since Tampa Bay certainly has different weather situations. So I don't know. I think, there are obviously other teams that Seattle could end up playing as well. The NFC East is just an absolute nightmare right now. And so that makes it a lot trickier. The Giants are in first place with a 4-7 record. Obviously Washington is tied with them at the 4-7 record as well. So Seattle could end up playing one of those two teams potentially. They were playing both of them in the next couple of weeks, so definitely check that out for Seahawks fans, because that could be a playoff matchup, even though those teams have winning percentages of 36. That is the state of affairs in the NFL, particularly in the NFC East. Having division winners automatically get higher seeds in the playoffs is dumb. It has always been dumb. Other leagues don't do this for a reason. And you can see why, especially in football, where you have so few games, where when you have teams with 36% winning percentages, potentially earning higher seeds than 11, 12 win teams, you have a problem. You have a system that's potentially broken, and that's kind of what you see. With the Seahawks here, it's hurt them in years past in seeding. It could hurt them this year again if they don't win that Rams game. That's why that game becomes more important. I would love for Seattle to just come out and beat down on Los Angeles. I think they're capable of doing it. But we saw from that last game against the Rams, obviously we saw what Jalen Ramsey did. The way that he lined up against DK Metcalf completely took him out of the game. The connection between him and Russ was just non-existent. And that's such a mess. I mean, we talked about it with this game here, this game against Philadelphia that just happened. DK had pretty much all of Seattle's offense. And that shouldn't always be the case. I mean, Tyler Lockett had 3 catches for 23 yards. That's uncharacteristic for him. Will Dissly didn't have a catch at all. Uncharacteristic for him. You know, David Moore did not have any catches as well. He had a couple catches, but he had -6 yards. So that's not what you want. So I think, you know, Seattle needs to find a way to spread the ball around without DK, and they need to do it over the next couple of weeks to get comfortable with it, because you know what the Rams are going to do in that contest. But again, they have Tyler Lockett. He's been a Pro Bowl caliber player for multiple seasons. It just didn't work in that Rams game for a lot of reasons. Russ was just not himself, or even remotely close to himself in that game. But in theory, they should go into LA with Chris Carson healthy, with Carlos Hyde healthy. That will help. Those are players they did not have the last time these two teams played each other. Who the hell knows? Maybe they'll have Josh Gordon. We haven't talked about that in a while. I don't think I've addressed that at all on this podcast, but Josh Gordon could get reinstated and he could play football in the NFL. I haven't heard anything. There's not been any strong indication that that's imminent, but that would be great. It would be fun. I mean, the last time the Seahawks got Josh Gordon around this time, if I'm not mistaken, and he played 5 or 6 games for the Seahawks, looked pretty darn good. So maybe that would be a nice weapon for them to have going into that LA game and any other games. They'd take him now if they could. I promise you that. Never one to turn away high level talent if it falls into your lap. And this would be a fantastic situation for that. So for now, Seahawks fans get a short week. They get to go into this game against the New York Giants, a team that I think is fine. I don't know the situation with Daniel Jones, so it's hard to make too many guesses on that. Wayne Gallman's been running the ball very well for them. He's 94 yards and a touchdown in their last game against the Bengals, which they eked out a win. Colt McCoy is the backup quarterback there. Just as a reminder for people who are wondering who they would see if they don't see Daniel Jones, they would see Colt McCoy, who is still in the NFL. I guess that's the best thing that I can say about Colt McCoy. He's 6 for 10 for 31 yards against the Bengals after Daniel Jones left that game. He's not good anymore. He was never great in the NFL. I don't think that he would pose a massive problem for the Seahawks in that game, but you know, their defense has been a challenge, and McCoy, I think, would likely set up to do a lot of those really short yardage situations. And if they play back in that zone, that soft zone, they could exploit them for a lot of simple, easy yards that way. I don't think it's going to ultimately lead to a win, but it is something to watch out for when that game happens. All right, so that is going to do it for me today. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. I had so much fun today talking to Andrew. I hope you guys all enjoyed it as well. Hopefully he can be back on the show and continue to do this kind of setup with the guests coming on in the middle of the show and kind of capping the show on either side with other various topics to talk about. So thank you all again. I'll be back next week, same time, Monday at 7:00 p.m., hopefully to be talking about a potential Seattle Sounders MLS Cup win. Thanks again. Have a good one.
It's the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.